Question 1. Data subject consent under the GDPR. Which of the following is true regarding the consent of data subjects for processing their personal data? A. Consent must be implicit and can be inferred from the data subject's actions. B. Consent must be given for each specific purpose, where processing is based on consent. C. Consent once given is irrevocable and cannot be withdrawn by the data subject. D. Consent is not necessary if the data controller deems the processing necessary. Correct answer, B. Explanation. Article 7 of the GDPR emphasizes that consent must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. Question 2. Data Protection Officer (DPO) requirements. Which of the following entities is required to designate a Data Protection Officer (DPO) under the GDPR? A. A small retail store processing personal data solely for employee payroll. B. A public authority processing personal data in the performance of its tasks. C. An online forum with less than 250 members, processing personal data for advertising. D. A local community group processing personal data for membership administration. Correct answer, B. Explanation. Article 37 of the GDPR requires the designation of a DPO for all public authorities or bodies, except for courts acting in their judicial capacity. Question 3. Rights of data subjects. Which of the following rights is not explicitly provided to data subjects under the GDPR? A. The right to data portability. B. The right to be forgotten, right to erasure. C. The right to receive personal data breach notifications within 72 hours. D. The right to object to processing based on legitimate interests or public tasks. Correct answer, C. Explanation. The GDPR mandates that data controllers notify the supervisory authority of data breaches within 72 hours, under certain conditions. Article 33. But there's no explicit requirement for a 72-hour notification directly to data subjects. Question 4. International data transfers under the GDPR. Which mechanism cannot be used to lawfully transfer personal data to a third country or international organization? A. Adequacy decisions. B. Binding corporate rules, BCRs. C. Standard contractual clauses, SCCs. D. Verbal agreements between the data controller and the data processor. Correct answer, D. Explanation. Verbal agreements are not considered a valid mechanism for the transfer of personal data to third countries or international organizations under the GDPR. Question 5. Data breach notification. Which statement is accurate regarding the GDPR's requirement for data breach notifications to data subjects? A. Notification to data subjects is required for all data breaches, regardless of their severity. B. Notification to data subjects is not required if the data breach is unlikely to result in a risk to their rights and freedoms. C. Notification to data subjects must always be done within 24 hours after discovering the data breach. Notification to data subjects is only required if the data breach involves sensitive data. Correct answer, B. Explanation. According to Article 34 of the GDPR, when a data breach is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons, the controller must communicate the breach to the affected data subjects without undue delay. Question 6. Legitimate Interests Assessment, LIA. Which statement is true about conducting a Legitimate Interests Assessment, LIA, under the GDPR? A. An LIA is required for processing personal data under any of the legal bases specified in the GDPR. B. An LIA is mandatory only when the processing is for direct marketing purposes. C. An LIA must consider the balance between the interests of the data controller and the rights and freedoms of the data subject. D. An LIA is optional and not necessary for compliance with the GDPR's principles. Correct answer, C. Explanation. When processing is based on legitimate interests, Article 6(1)(f) of the GDPR, the controller must perform an LIA to ensure that the interests, rights, and freedoms of the data subject do not override the legitimate interests pursued by the controller. Question 7. Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA, requirement. In which scenario is a Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA, explicitly required under the GDPR? A. When the processing involves encrypted data only. B. When processing involves systematic monitoring of a publicly accessible area on a large scale. C. When processing personal data for payroll purposes in a small company D. When a company updates its email system. Correct answer, B. Explanation. Article 35 of the GDPR requires a DPIA for processing operations that are likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals, notably for large-scale systematic monitoring of public areas. Question 8. Joint controllers under the GDPR. Joint controllers must A. Share equally in the financial liabilities arising from data protection breaches. B. Clearly define their respective responsibilities for compliance in a transparent manner. C. Always obtain consent from data subjects before any data processing. D. Register their arrangement with the relevant data protection authority. Correct answer, B. Explanation. Article 26 of the GDPR requires joint controllers to, in a transparent manner, determine their respective responsibilities for compliance with the obligations under the regulation. Question 9. Right to data portability. The right to data portability, Article 20, allows data subjects to A. Demand deletion of all personal data held by the data controller. B. Receive personal data in a structured, commonly used and machine-readable format. C. Transfer their data to another controller without the need for the controller's consent. D. Receive financial compensation for the use of their data. Correct answer, B. Explanation. The right to data portability allows data subjects to receive their personal data in a structured, commonly used and machine-readable format and to transmit those data to another controller. Question 10. Special categories of personal data under GDPR. Processing of special categories of personal data is prohibited unless A. The data subject has provided explicit consent for one or more specified purposes. The processing is necessary for the performance of a contract with the data subject. C. The data has been anonymized. D. The data is processed by a non-EU-based company. Correct answer, A. Explanation. Article 9 of the GDPR prohibits processing special categories of personal data unless the data subject has given explicit consent for one or more specified purposes, among other exceptions.